Well, here we are again, another expansion completed and another collection of data to parse over and consider. While most players are enjoying their time creating different decks and experimenting, I'm over here, looking at the judgments people made during reveal season and seeing where people were incorrect. But of course, I can't just go judging others' mistakes and then arrogantly waltz away. That'd be too easy. I made all of my opinions publicly available for others to gawk at, for the purpose of holding myself to decent standards. And despite having a thorough, if somewhat complicated rating system, I can still be wrong. Speaking of, I made small adjustments to these 4 cards' ratings, mostly in terms of complexity. I won't talk too much about it, because these mistakes are small fry compared to the rest of this video. Someday I should probably make a website that has all of this information, but that day is not today. Today, we look at the greatest grievances I committed, the cards that I looked at and failed to understand. Is it embarrassing? Absolutely, but one is not born smart, one must fail 1,000 times before he is considered a master. This is just me throwing my failures out for all to see. So without further ado, let's begin. This is the top 5 cards from Rastakhan's Rumble that I, the penniless player, misrated. Mojo Master Zihi. This card comes in at the bottom of the list because I did manage to recognize some of its worth. Mana reduction effects, while uncommon, do exist, and using this card in conjunction with those reduces the impact those cards have. However, I failed to recognize this card's true purpose, stopping combo. As short-lived as Druid's existence in this meta was, this card does a fantastic job bringing them to heal, while also doing a good job with other decks like Death Knight Paladin. Frankly, this oversight should have had this card at the top of the list, but I think in the back of my mind I still knew it had these aspects. I just didn't realize them properly and talk about them. So, here's the admission of my failure. Amani Bear. I must have rolled my eyes when I saw this card, baffled as to how it could possibly be any good. Rush and Taunt are 2 very similar concepts, both working to establish board presence in similar but slightly different ways. Viewing this card, I concluded that these ways were pretty much anti-synergistic with one another, and therefore would have lost more in worth in terms of stats than it gained with either its Taunt or its Rush. Turns out, it's not that simple. Rush and Taunt may be similar, but a card possessing both of these traits isn't significantly weaker for it. While the bear has lower stats than a 7-mana Taunt or a 7-mana Rush minion, it makes up for it by having the option of doing either of those things or a combination of the two. That only makes it slightly better in terms of ratings, but Beast synergies and Warrior having synergy with both Taunt and Rush have allowed this card to actually see play. That I did not expect, but in hindsight I definitely should have. Splitting Image. I don't know what I was thinking when I gave this card a decent if decent, that rating being pretty much what I give a card I consider perfect in terms of balance. Perhaps I was thinking of synergies with cards like Lich King, possessing Taunt and a strong effect. Perhaps I was considering cards like Sorcerer's Apprentice, where you want as many copies as possible. Whatever I thought, I was flat out wrong. This card does not encourage combination plays whatsoever, thanks to its nature as a secret. A secret gives somewhat stronger effects in exchange for the player not choosing when they occur. In theory, this card can yield interesting combinations, but in practice the weaknesses are severe. Polymorph, Hex, Leroy, and Sarnite Taskmaster just to name a few, or the opponent could just ignore the minions. This weakness already exists with Hunter's Serpent Secrets. But while it's only mildly annoying to bypass Hunter's Secrets, reversing the effects of this one is much more disastrous. How I thought otherwise is an oversight for the ages. Baited Arrow. When first revealed, I considered this card comparable, even weaker than, the card Bane of Doom, which has seen little play over the years. After all, Bane of Doom has the possibility of summoning Void Lord and nobody uses it. Why would a measly 5/5 succeed instead? That oversight actually highlights a remarkable flaw in my thinking, one that I'll touch upon more in the next few weeks. For a simple explanation, imagine you're facing one player using Bane of Doom and another using Baited Arrow, and you have an Assassinate in hand. The Bane of Doom summons Mal'Ganis, king of all demons, and the arrow summons the Devilsaur. In the end, the result is the same. You hard remove the target and come out at a small loss. But the Bane of Doom may summon a Flame Imp, in which case you can save your Assassinate for later. Thus, the best case for the Bane of Doom is the same as the best case for the Baited Arrow, while the worst case is much worse. True, in practice the situation is never quite this simple, but the point holds. While Bane of Doom is inconsistent, Baited Arrow is not. A 5/5 minion is an interesting subject because it's just threatening enough to be afraid of, but just weak enough that using your removal on it isn't ideal. I overlooked this, mostly because I thought Bane of Doom was awesome and that nobody ever saw how powerful it could be. I now recognize that card's weakness, and how this card avoids that weakness while maintaining all of its strengths. Let us document this failure and take this knowledge with us into the future. Mass Hysteria. This card wasn't exactly me having the wrong idea, it was worse. When looking at this card, I concluded it was too complicated to properly assess and just gave it a low rating, because my intuition told me that it wasn't a particularly strong effect. But if there's one thing you take away from this video, let it be this. Intuition is bullshit. That advice applies to all aspects of life, not just Hearthstone. So let's give this card the review it deserves. Trying to assess the many situations this card can be used in quickly becomes impossible, so let's look at it from a larger perspective. Mass Hysteria creates attacks equal in number to the number of minions on the field. The only way that number is lowered is if the minion dies before it's attacked, which is nearly the equivalent of that minion just not existing in the first place. That means that every minion either attacks another minion or dies, usually both. Hypothetically, having low attack minions would counter this, but even in the case of 3/3/6 minions on the field, there's a 75% chance of a board clear and a 25% chance this card still becomes the equivalent of a brawl. In fact, the only case where this card doesn't do exceptional at board clearing is when there are minions with particularly high health compared to attack. And I think it's fair to say most decks don't run a lot of those. In conclusion, this card may be random at its core, but its randomness often yields great results. The fact that I not only failed to assess this, but didn't even attempt to assess this, is why it caps off this list. I'll be sure to never make that mistake ever again. Here are a few more cards I considered for this list. Ornery Tortoise. Definitely the card most people thought I overrated. I definitely underestimated how dangerous lowering your health is, but the card still has its uses. Bloodclaw. Same story as Ornery Tortoise, but this time no one seemed to call me out on it. Funny that. Tree Speaker. This card can actually be quite powerful, but it's important to note that it has anti-synergy with other cards in the Tree Ant package. So it probably won't see play, but it does deserve better than what I gave it here. Rumbletusk Shaker. I overestimated how good it is to have a sticky minion. Maybe if it was a mech and had a little more attack, it would be a little better. Sulthraze. Ironically, I advocated positively for this card, but still gave it a rating that was a little too low. If you got a tempo rush warrior you want to play, I highly recommend this weapon. And finally, I rated these cards a little too high. Here's the correction. And these cards I rated a little too low. Here's the correction. And that's about it. Do you think I missed any? Anything I said in the last couple of months that made it seem like I had an incorrect idea? Let me know in the comments if so. Tune in next time when it's your turn to be ridiculed. Until then, remember, only idiots think that they're always right.